important that we look at ourselves, right? Like where does that come from in the first place, right? Because that mindset leads to burnout, it leads to resentment, and it leads to missed opportunities a lot. And I reflect back, when we look at the kind of people that go into healthcare as a whole, we generally want to go in because we want to help people. We genuinely.
So let's get real. Our value as doctors has significantly diminished over the last decade. So how can we turn that around by upskilling and creating rewarding and impactful careers on our own terms? Welcome to Disrupting Doctors' Careers. I'm your host, Dr. Bubbers-Jones, and I'm on a mission to connect 1 million talented doctors with the best in diverse career opportunities.
Hello. Today I've chosen a really, maybe sometimes it might be seen as controversial, but a topic that is very close to my heart, that keeps on coming up again and again, and I cannot help but talk really frankly and open about it. It's about doctors and a money shame, right? So doctors and money shame. And so as doctors, we save lives, right? We literally save lives. We work very long hours at the sacrifice of our lives, right? With our families, with our friends, with our own well-being and health, right? We sacrifice so much. But despite that, like, we're made to feel guilty. And we've been conditioned to feel guilty about asking to be paid our true value and asking for more money so that we can literally just pay the bills, work a little bit less, and do our best work, right? So like this conversation, this podcast is one that you cannot miss. If you are a doctor and you have your money blockers and you're really looking to find a more sustainable way to do some great work, have a great kind of life balance, work-life balance, not burn out, and really be able to talk confidently about what you want and what you want to earn and what your income is, right? So what I'm going to be covering is a few points on understanding money shame, examples of how money shame pops up, especially from external factors. We'll talk a bit about premium pricing and values-based strategy as a way to overcome the money shame, and other options on how to own your worth. So let's get started. So I chose this topic because literally twice in one day, there are two things that really popped up. So one of them, a text message, right? So I received a WhatsApp message from a startup, right? So health startup, from someone who came from a private equity background. So for those of you that don't know, private equity is really where a lot of money is, right? They have money, right? So they're usually funds that then invest in other companies and other things, right? So startup, and they were looking for a doctor to join the team, particularly because they needed introductions, right? They needed to get into healthcare, they needed to sell to healthcare, and they realized they didn't have any medical input. And just let me tell you guys, not having medical input in a startup is super common, right? A health startup I'm talking about. Any health startups, I think the majority, I don't have the numbers, but a large portion of healthcare startups or health tech startups do not have any clinician leadership or input, especially at early stages. And there's lots of reasons why that is. Anyway, so this one didn't. And they approached me because I have a large network, and they're looking for doctors, and especially doctors with commercial experience. And we do work with startups, we work with private equity, we work with VC to help connect them or provide them with doctors who have that commercial experience, that can form boards, that can become medical advisors, and really help them increase the value of their product, right? So going back to this this founder, so they were like, we're looking for someone to help us. We want them to open doors. And I said, great. Sounds like a great wellness product. Can you tell me a bit more about, like, do you have a budget in mind? I always tend to ask that because, especially startup stage, because of this, right? So I said, yeah, do you have a budget? And they said, we're really keen to offer an equity share for this startup, and we'll see what value they provide, and then we can revisit. Right? So equity share and the value that they could provide, and then we'll revisit. And so let's jump into that. So equity share. Right. So this is like sweat equity. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically they're giving you a share of the company in return for your time and your work. Right. And in reality, most startups, like over 90% of them, will fail in the first 2 years. And realistically, you won't see a return on your effort unless it's successful. And if it is successful for quite some time, right? So very difficult to then translate that into money, especially if you as someone, your goal is to become financially stable. Your goal is to get to a certain revenue or income level. Like, this would not be the right opportunity for you, right? And the other, so that's the equity bit. The second is they wanted to see the value first, and then they'll revisit. So, I mean, we talked about this in our fellow Doctors in Industry fellow mess yesterday. They know what the value is. They know that value is huge and hugely valuable. The value is introducing the startup to healthcare providers. So that's introducing startup to healthcare providers, right? So for a lot of healthcare providers, that means credibility, trust, relationships, sales. Saves them a heck of a lot of time, right? But they're also saying in the same sentence, they're not, they've got to prove their worth. And so this is where I have an issue. This is where I have an issue. And again, it then goes back to culturally, what are they expecting from doctors? And so this is where I'm going to move on to same startup. Can you imagine? Would they be asking, say, a lawyer or a solicitor the same thing? Hey, can you come on board? Give you some equity for this startup, and I'll see your value, and then we'll revisit whether we pay you or not. Do you think they'll have the same conversation? How about tech, right? A tech person, same again, right? Unless a tech person knows the founder very well and they're best friends and they've got this amazing idea, right? But most of the time, if you're finding someone external, unless someone's like deeply entrepreneurial and they've made a lot of money already and they're like, I'm just looking for a great challenge, then, they wouldn't be, I can promise you, they wouldn't be openly asking a tech person to come and work for free at that stage, right? Because it's a huge risk. But then I'm wondering, like, why is it that doctors fall into this trap? Because I've seen many doctors that end up going for this and it goes nowhere, and it's a waste of their time, essentially. When I say waste of time, it's the experience that counts, and that's great. But if you've got a very clear goal, beyond experience, and most of this is about financial stability, at least to start, if you're developing your career in industry, then this would not be a great opportunity for you. So, it's really important that when we look at how we're conditioned to feel bad about negotiating for pay or charging premium rates, it's really important that we look at ourselves, right? Like, where does that come from in the first place, right? Because that mindset leads to burnout, it leads to resentment, and it leads to missed opportunities a lot. And I reflect back, when we look at the kind of people that go into healthcare as a whole, we generally want to go in because we want to help people. We generally and genuinely want to help people and want to make a difference, right? And that's really important. So a lot of us are mission or purpose driven, right? But at the same time, what that equals, especially if you're in a public healthcare system, is that you end up doing a lot of extra work for no additional remuneration. And so what does that look like? Staying after hours, doing extra projects, such as quality improvement projects, audits, doing that internally, these are things that a lot of healthcare providers also pay consulting firms to come and do as well. And being asked to speak at conferences, again, for free, yet they'll still be paying for others to actually come and speak. It's things like that. So it's really subtle exploitation. But again, it goes back into the culture. So the culture of how we position ourselves and we position our values. At the end of the day, we're not in medicine for the money. Like we're in it for financial stability in many ways. But as we've seen over the last few decades, achieving that is becoming increasingly difficult. Right? So what other cultural narratives reinforce money shame? So going back to medicine, it's a calling. We're purpose driven, we're mission driven, right? It's not a career. We're not driven by money, which is true. We're not driven by money, right? But that doesn't mean that we should not be financially rewarded for our work, right? And a lot of that was reinforced in medical school and the professional culture. Another is being just grateful for our jobs, grateful to be working, right? And we're basically, especially if you're in the public healthcare sector, like you're being told what you're paid, right? Told to accept whatever salary you're getting. This is your worth. This is your banding, and then we decide, depending on how many years you've been doing this, what it is. And at the end of the day, these large organizations have structured it for a very good reason to create some degree of equity. However, especially if you're someone that is really looking for more because the cost of living is expensive and inflation has not, salaries have not kept up with inflation, then you're saying a big no and looking for other options so that you can break that salary ceiling, right? So, when you're being pushed, when I say pushed, as in like there's no one else, can you stay for a bit or else these patients will die, pushed to do unpaid overtime, free teaching and other extra responsibilities without compensation, what do? You just do it, don't you? Because you're not really in it for the money. But in that moment when you're asked to do it, at the end of the day, like, you are also saying no to a lot of things that's personal. You're saying no to yourself. You're saying no to your own free time. You're saying no to your family if you've got children or a partner. You're saying no to a lot of things. So to the value of your personal time, right? You're saying it's less valuable than what's going on here, right? And another thing is you can't be a good doctor and care about money at the same time. It's not ethical. It's not moral, etc., etc., right? And and I just don't understand where this false belief that financial ambition means that you can't be compassionate at the same time. Some of the richest people in the world are actually really altruistic and donate millions all the time. Yes, tax relief, but they wouldn't. There's other ways to get tax relief. But at the end of the day, a lot of people tend to go for a huge amount of like monetary wealth so they can help other people, at scale. They're essentially putting their own gas mask on so they can help other people, not in spite of helping other people. And in reality, financial security helps us as doctors to provide better care, avoid burnout, and help others on our own terms. So better care, right? If you're someone who you're not working for the money because you're financially stable, you're not going to be working all the hours to try and make the pay. You're going to be working, but not all the hours. So that means you're going to be more rested. You're going to enjoy the time you're doing your clinical work, and you're not going to be tired. You're not going to be making mistakes, right? Why would you not want to be in that situation more than having to work more hours for less money? Right? You do a better job. It's as simple as that, because you're not driven by needing to earn, and you've got to work all the hours. Right? So, I mean, we hear stories from doctors, especially those in our fellowship, who actually enjoy medicine more, with a hybrid or portfolio career. They enjoy medicine more when they do have that financial stability, when they do have that balance. Right. And they can do a better job, and they can do better work, and they don't feel forced or trapped. Like, who wouldn't want to feel that? Right. So moving on to what I said, the example of the startup previously, it's really important that if you're developing your career in industry, that you understand what being asked, but what it looks like to be asked for free consulting, because I think the reality is doctors don't realize what's valuable. Okay, so I get this all the time, but like we recently had another fellow who was approached by a startup and said, hey, we've got this product, we really love what you're doing, we'd really love to get your thoughts on what we're doing, and we'd love to hear about what you're doing. At the end of the day, this could be a lovely just discovery call and chat, but this is actually consulting, because this is the startup that is asking for your opinion and advice, and they always have to do market research on their products and test it and get doctors to test it, et cetera, right? And it's like asking a lawyer, can I just pick your brain? And they'll be like, sure, that will cost £300 an hour, right? So just beware of that. And to be honest, there is nothing wrong with having a conversation. There is nothing wrong with like actually giving value in a conversation, but just be very clear as to where your boundaries are with the amount of time and energy that you put into that relationship. Because there has to be a point at where you are remunerated for what you're doing and the information that you're sharing and the insights that you have. And so one of the things we do is like we connect doctors with paid survey companies, right? So they're paying you for your opinion, and you don't have to be talking to anyone. You could just do a survey online on your phone, right? And I know I have been paid several hundreds of pounds for 1 hour, right? Just for my opinions. So people do this, you can get paid for this. And so don't underestimate the value of what's in your head and the value of your own experience. Other examples, I mean, the consulting gigs that offer a vague equity share instead of proper pay. You've got companies that are putting together medical advisory boards, unpaid medical advisory boards, again, testing their value, not really being clear on what the value is. Well, they know what the value is. They're just that at the end of the day, startups, they generally don't have any money when they start, or they're reserving the money for professionals that value their time. Right. Being asked to speak at conferences for free. So it's interesting, this one, because this was very much me for a very long time. Like, you just do it for free. There are very few conferences that will offer you paid speaking gigs unless you say, I have a fee, right? So don't expect to be offered to be paid to speak, because they will say, hey, you'll get this exposure, blah, blah, blah. You'll get this and that and the other. And a lot of people would be grateful. Remember the word grateful, to speak at these conferences. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong for doing that at the same time. But again, if you are someone, you've got a very clear focus and goal on really achieving that financial stability, you've got a clear income goal, you have to reevaluate, is this going to be worth my time? Or how can I leverage this experience? How can I leverage this experience to then point towards my revenue goal? So I'll use an example. One of our fellows was asked to speak at a public sector organization, not naming a public sector organization. They were asked to speak, and they said, and this would have been great for their own business, by the way. This would have been amazing for their business, to put them in front of a large audience who would be their customers. At the same time, they've been invited, and so they said, happy to speak, but these are my fees, right? And was also a bit like, how much do I charge? Like that comes up a lot, right? So this is actually through a WhatsApp message in our group. And we said, hey, charge what you want and then add 50% and see what happens, right? So this doctor went and did that. Next thing we knew, this doctor was speaking, the only paid speaker at this conference, the only paid one. They basically were also able to get leads and interest in their business, and then got the exposure, and they got, so they got everything. So you want to be in that situation. You want to get that triple win, right? You want the exposure, you want the leads, and you want to be paid, right? Why would you not go for that as like the top priority, right? So if you've been asked to go for speaking gigs, don't expect to be invited to be paid, right? No matter how big or how illustrious or how premium or how you just should be grateful for this exposure. You know, you need to get into the habit of actually saying, well, this is what I charge, right? And the last thing that doctors just don't really get is hugely valuable. And I've mentioned it earlier, going back to the equity example of opening doors, your networks. So you might be like, what is that? I don't know anyone. You know a lot of health people in healthcare. You know a healthcare system because you've worked in it. You know people. You know doctors or clinicians in other hospitals. A lot of people who are trying to get into health tech, who are not clinicians, who are not in health, need you to open doors because it saves a lot of time. It adds a lot of credibility. It improves their own reputation, especially now they can put a badge on their product saying clinically validated or validated by a doctor or whatever it is. We've got a doctor on our team. The minute you have a doctor on anyone's team, you know that, you know, this isn't a joke, you know, because at the end of the day, as doctors, we're not going to buy into any product we don't believe in, right? We're a regulated profession. We're not doing it for the money. We need the money, but we're not doing it for the money. And so there's this real element of trust. And so a lot of doctors don't realize that when companies say, hey, would you mind introducing me to X? That is like, ka-ching, this is where you should be paid, right? Whether it money, if your goal is money, say, well, this is my fee for an introduction, right? And then you can negotiate around that. If they're like, well, we don't have any cash right now, find something that will benefit you and benefit them. You should always be really going for like a win-win, right? It doesn't have to be money, but if money is your goal, always focus on the money. If money isn't your goal, what other things could be helpful for you, especially if they don't have cash, and also be helpful for them. So you don't feel like you're literally giving something away for literal free, because a lot of companies will pay tens to hundreds of thousands, if not more, for introductions that then lead to sales of their product. And a lot of companies just need one hospital to start working with, which then massively boosts their own credibility and then gets them investors, then gets them more funding, then gets them more, you know, like it literally transforms their outcomes. So it's really important that you're aware of that when a company comes up to you and say, hey, can you give me an introduction? Right. And that's happened so many times. Like we also had a fellow who, again, a lot of companies saying, hey, can you give us some introductions and let's see how it go, and then we'll decide whether to pay you. At the end of the day, you know, if they can get it done for free, why wouldn't they try? So your job is to say, hey, I can see this is really valuable to you, and actually it's really valuable to a lot of people. This is my fee. And then you negotiate. And I've had it so many times where when you do come back and say, this is my fee, this is what I charge, they say, okay, let's talk about it. Because at the end of the day, they're just trying to get things for free because, you know, a lot of startups, a lot of small companies, they're resource poor. And if you can, then you will, right? So your goal is to really stand with your value and recognize what is valuable. Again, another fellow, one of their prospective clients is fundraising for their startup. Again, like didn't realize that the value of them being on their board or in their company would massively improve their credibility, especially when it comes to investors, being in front of investors and due diligence. In fact, I'm increasingly seeing a lot more companies in general looking for doctors with a commercial background to help with sales. Right? Just being there is like, oh, we've got this credibility stamp. This is what, because as doctors, especially in healthcare provider companies, you are the product. They're selling us, right? We are providing the service. And so they're bringing the doctors in and saying, hey, this is what this doctor does, you know? So we are hugely valuable. People see that we're valuable. But if we don't see that we're valuable, then we're not going to be charging or even stating our value. And that needs to change, and soon, right? And so like, what can you do about that, right? So okay, fine. What do I charge? That's the biggest question, and there's no like right answer to this. But I will tell you about two strategies that I employ and I advise my fellows in the Doctors in Industry Fellowship Program to use as doctors as like one of the only strategies you should be using. Realistically, if you're leveraging your expertise, which is your product, you're the product, you need to be using these two core strategies: premium pricing and value-based. So premium pricing and value-based. So premium pricing is basically charging at the top end of the market, right? So I always use the analogy of the Ritz Hotel would be the top end of the market, and the Travelodge would be the other end of the market, right? And anything. So you want to be going for the Ritzes, right? And I'll tell you a bit more. And then value-based. So we're used to charging by the hour, right, or by the day, right? That's a problem, especially if you're developing an industry career, because you're still attaching your value to how much work you do, right? And don't forget, say for example, we'll go back to the example of a doctor's been asked to introduce a tech company into a primary care service, right? So the tech company can then go ka-ching and start selling their product, right? How much work does a doctor need to do for that? It could be a phone call, right? It could be a few emails. It could be a few conversations. It probably won't even take that long, right? So, but what's the value of that? If this company is selling a product at, say, for example, 300K or let's say 500K, right? You spent 3-4 hours of work of your time doing that, and you may have charged, I don't know, 400 quid, right? So what value have you provided this company? How much time have you saved them? How much money have you saved them? How much headache have you saved them? Right? Is it still worth 400 quid? See, that is the question. So when it comes to value-based, it doesn't matter how much time you work. You can create value in a very short space of time. So you charge for the value, not for the time. And so when I'm mentoring my doctors, I always say, go for projects. So you know what you're doing in the project. You have an idea of how much time you're spending, but that's not what you're measuring here. You're saying, what is the value of this project? You know, I've seen people that have done literally a few hours work and charged tens of thousands because the value of what they did in that time is super high, right? So these two strategies together are powerful and essential if you're a doctor. And this is key, because if you're a doctor and you're undercharging, and there's this mismatch, because people will expect you to actually have a higher value than you're giving, and you're like, wait, hold on, does that mean that you're not valuable because you're offering at a lower rate, so your expertise isn't going to be worth much and you're not going to be that good? That is what you're communicating. People expect us to be high value. So when say, for example, if I said I'm a barrister and I said I'm charging like 20 quid an hour, what would you be thinking? Would you be like, oh, she's a good barrister? No, you would not. No, you would not, right? So think about it in that case. So see, these two strategies together, they protect you against burnout, because you're charging appropriately, fewer hours, massive transformational impact. And again, as I said, it avoids you having to overwork, get overwhelmed, and just to make ends meet and pay the bills, right? We talked about making sure that it enables you to do your best work. And if you're like, well, I want to work with companies or people that don't have any money, it enables you to do that because you put your gas mask on and you've served clients that have the money. And then in your spare time, in the free time that you don't have to extra work, you can go and help those other companies or people that you really want to support that don't have the money. It's a strategy, and it works way better that way, right? Way better. Underserved communities, right? Pro bono cases. That's the strategy that a lot of professionals, apart from doctors for some reason, do, right? So more money, more time for family, more money, more time for your passion projects, more money, more personal growth time, and better understanding yourself, right? I am one of those people, as I've really increased my income by doing less work, by the way, by doing less work and not working all the hours. And one thing I've actually managed to do is get out of the habit of doing lots of work. So initially, when you're like, oh my God, my time is freed up, I would just fill it in with more work, because that's all I've been doing for all of my life. And so it really is about getting you away from that addiction of working and really enabling you to give you more time to really learn about yourself. Because as doctors, as professionals, we've spent our whole lives on this conveyor belt, right? Whole lives in this conveyor belt of exams, deadlines, training, and we've never really had time to stop and really think about who we are outside of that box of medicine, right? And I spent a lot of time doing that, a lot of time. And it has, but this is why I'm here talking to you, right? This is why I'm here. Had I not done the work, I probably wouldn't be talking even about money, because I'm a doctor. I don't like talking about money. A lot of us, we're financially illiterate, but that has to change, right? So how can I sit here confidently talking about money if I hadn't really gone through that process myself and done the work? Right. So remember, if you are someone that's undervaluing yourself, that won't last. It's unsustainable. If you're doing this now, listen, it is unsustainable. And when you price your work properly, it ensures longevity, ensures you can do your best work, and the flexibility, that autonomy, and that financial independence that you really want for yourself. So my top tips are your money is basically is equivalent to respect for your expertise. It's not about you being greedy, right? Don't let anyone tell you that you're not being greedy. It's respect for all of the years of training, all of the years of toiling, getting blood over your hands. I got hematuria in my face. I got needle stick injuries, the risk of getting bloodborne viruses, the psychological traumas from seeing people die in front of you, right? All of that. So that money is saying, hey, well done for doing all of that and the experience you've gained, which is hugely valuable, right? So it's not about you being greedy and saying, hey, I recognize you have bills to pay to live too, right? So it's about the value. And the only people that will come and shame you for asking for more are usually those who will benefit from you asking for less. So I'll say that again. The only people who will shame you in asking for more are usually those who will benefit from you asking for less, right? So the way forward is set a minimum rate. So I always say to my fellows, just make sure you're very clear. What's the minimum amount that you're willing to charge? Right, because we all have a certain goal, like revenue goal in our minds, right? And so think about what is the minimum in respect to my revenue goal. What's the minimum that I should be charging? I'll use an example. Say your revenue goal is like 150, for example, right? And your minimum ticket was like $1,000. How many clients would you need to serve to get to 150? And could you manage that? Right? It would not be very manageable unless you had a very scalable product and a huge audience, right? And we're talking about independently working, right? It's possible, but if you're someone that's working independently and you're farming out your expertise into industry, that's not sustainable. You could be saying my minimum ticket, I've got 150 grand revenue, is 150 grand. You only want one client, and that is absolutely possible. That is absolutely possible, right? It could be 1 million. One client, absolutely possible. Again, you would have to shift your mindset in your approach to get that client, but it's absolutely doable. And I've seen it done time and time again. I'm using an example. I joined a coaching program very recently, and amongst incredible entrepreneurs from across the world, I met this guy. He's a flight geek. He's a pilot, but a geek, and he sells airplanes. One airplane, 50 million. One client, private client, not even an airline, private client, 50 million, one ticket, one sell. Is the value. That is the value, right? Practice saying no. Say, no, it's not for me, thank you. Or, let me know when you do have a budget and happy to support. You can say a real positive no. Remember, that no is you saying a yes to yourself, right? I also say I love to help, but at the moment I have to prioritize paid opportunities. And I also say that on behalf of my fellows when other companies are coming to ask for free time. And don't be afraid to negotiate. At the start of a conversation, if someone says, I want X, and you say, I want Y, you're going to get you're going to get to a point where you get to a middle. Everything is negotiable. And I think we forget that that's the case. We don't realize it's the case because we're used to just being told what we're going to be paid. Everything is negotiable. Right. And find your tribe, find a community of like-minded people. So the reason why I joined this coaching program is because I want to be around like-minded people, because I've got lofty ambitions and goals, again, to help more doctors like you to achieve real financial independence and do your best work at scale, right? And so I can only do that if I'm continually investing in myself and learning the strategies required, not only to help other people, but also to help myself and not get burnt out, because I get burnt out too. Occupational health physician, I do get burnt out, right? I'm addicted to working. I'm addicted to it. It's not great. And I've worked on it, and I've cut my working hours down to like 3 days a week, right? I spend a lot of time with my kids now, a lot more time. I don't work weekends. I don't work nights, right? And that's taken a lot of work, right? And it's so, but doing that required me to shift my way of thinking and spend more of my time with people doing what I want to do. So if you're someone that's like, right, I want some of that, but you're not spending a lot of your time with people doing that, that is a problem that you need to, that's like a priority you need to address. Because what you'll find is that your mindset will shift towards the people that are not doing, that you're spending most of your time with. And most people are not doing this. Most people are not in charge of their, like really in charge of their time, or even value their time, right? Most people aren't really seeking financial independence beyond a salary ceiling that's been told that that's where it is. Most people aren't doing that. There's lots of very complex societal, cultural reasons why that is. But if you're someone that wants to break through that, why don't you send me and my team an email? So we're on team@medicforhappiness.org, or you can potentially get hold of me on LinkedIn. So Bubbers-Jones. So it's really important that you break that cycle of undervaluation, and don't let others dictate what your true value is, right? You deserve to be paid what you feel like you're worth, and actually what the market, not even what the market says, what you feel like you're worth. And the reality is you will always be undervaluing yourself, right? I've never seen one doctor overvalue themselves in industry, not one, right? So if you're afraid of doing that, don't be. And if people bulk at a price, it's not because you've overvalued it. It's just they're not valuing what you're doing. There's a difference there, right? So make sure, try and get rid of the guilt or quieten the guilt. Try and get rid of the shame or quieten the shame, and just really, truly value yourself. All right, until next time.